Hi, my name's Tabytha Cunningham and I'm a Senior Associate in the Employment team at Paris Smith.
And I'm Emily Sadler, a Commercial and Franchising Partner also at Paris Smith.
We're here today to talk about some of the legal issues that can arise with franchisees. Taking on a franchise can be a great option for individuals that are wanting to start a business but with the benefit of an established brand and a support package behind you. And with many people looking to work flexibly, they can also give some great options for that as well.
However, it's really important that prospective franchisees completely read through the franchise agreement, which will be a very lengthy document and complicated, so that they fully understand their liabilities and obligations contractually owed to the franchisor. So we're going to look at some key questions that we're asked frequently about in relation to franchising versus employment rights. So first of all, are franchisees entitled to the same rights as an employee? Secondly, are franchisees entitled to family-friendly rights such as maternity leave? Finally, can a franchise agreement restrict a franchisee from carrying on in the same industry after the end of the franchise agreement?
So looking at the first question, Emily, are franchisees entitled to the same rights as an employee?
So the short answer is no. When you sign a franchise agreement, you are signing up to be in business for your own account. So you are not an employee of the franchisor, which is a really common misconception sometimes, or there is a bit of confusion there regarding the difference between the two relationships. So the essence of a franchise relationship is that it is a contractual relationship. There are no specific franchising laws in the UK, unlike the raft of employment legislation that there is. So there's no specific franchising laws. The relationship is wholly governed by what is usually a very lengthy, complicated franchise agreement, typically 50 to 60 pages. Very onerous and usually drafted in favour of the franchisor, hence why it's so important to take proper specialist advice on its terms and fully understand what you're signing up to, and that it says and does what you were led to believe you would be getting from that franchise. So as you are in business on your own account rather than being employed by the franchisor, you won't have the benefit of any employment rights. So for example, you wouldn't have any protection against dismissal in the traditional sense that we would consider that by a franchisor. I've often asked about constructive dismissal, where a franchisee feels that they've been poorly treated by a franchisor. That essentially just doesn't have any application here with a franchisee relationship. You don't have the benefit of holiday pay, you wouldn't have the benefit of minimum wage. If you've been promised family-friendly rights, you would need to get that written into the contract, as that really does govern the relationship.
And then the separate question is what benefits you're entitled to during that period. So usually as an employee, if you went on maternity leave, for example, you'd get your entitlement to statutory maternity pay. As a franchisee, you're not going to get that unless you have employed yourself through your own limited company and you're then an employee yourself that way. But what you might be entitled to is maternity allowance, which is a government benefit which offers you a really similar amount in terms of pay, other than during the first 6 weeks where an employee would get 90% of pay, and on maternity allowance you don't get that. But it is a question of looking at both in parallel as to what benefits you might be entitled to and negotiating those terms with the franchisor as well.
So in the recent case of Dwyer, which involved the Drain Doctor business and franchise, this was a case brought by the franchisor against its franchisee for breach of a restriction that prevented Dwyer from competing for 12 months within a 5-mile radius. The judge actually found in favour of the franchisee in this case, slightly to the horror of the franchising industry, because that was a very typical clause that we as franchise lawyers were very used to just putting into our franchise agreements and being relatively confident that they would be enforced. But in this particular case, the judge looked at the fact that it was a standard form franchise agreement, that Dwyer hadn't actually had any opportunity to renegotiate in practice, that he had no prior business experience. He was only 18 months into what was a 10-year term of franchise, and that actually there hadn't really been any build-up of goodwill within his territory because he hadn't been operating very long and he had had a cold start in his territory. There was no established business there. So in those circumstances and on those facts, which is always the case with restrictive covenants, that judges will look at things case by case, the judge found in favour of Dwyer and held the 12-month restriction to be void, and Drain Doctor couldn't enforce it. So that's one case. It was a Court of Appeal case, so it does hold great weight going forward. However, it remains to be seen what impact that has on franchising going forward, and whether judges follow suit, or whether it was a specific case decided on specific facts. So the case of Dwyer is actually quite helpful potentially for franchisees going forward, as it shows that a judge, quite similar to an employment contract case, is perhaps less willing to enforce a restriction that goes further than is considered necessary to protect the franchisor's legitimate interests in the business. However, it is still important for prospective franchisees to really look and consider the restrictions within their franchise agreement, make sure they fully understand the implications and take legal advice on them.
So I hope that's helped with some of your key questions in relation to franchisees and the employment issues that can arise. If you do need any help reviewing the terms of a franchise agreement, or you have any questions about your rights as a franchisee, then please do contact us and we'll be happy to help.